There are 3 legs to an academic life. How many people here are in industry, by the way? Okay, so I apologize. We're going to be speaking mainly to the academics because, well, Dan came from industry, so maybe you could put a few more words in there. But as you can see, my entire life has been academic. So I started out, I grew up in Ithaca, New York. I went to Cornell. That's where I met my husband. In high school, my parents were both on the faculty, so a lot of my life has been driven by academia. I then went to Princeton University, where my son was born at the end of 4 years. So again, this is just giving you the context of what I might view to be important in an academic career. I then immediately went to the University of Pennsylvania, where midway before I came up for tenure, my son Chris was born. My father also died a year or 2 after that. And so what you'll see from this is A, I'm an academic through and through. B, my experience is really with these types of Ivy League institutions. 3, that family has always been central in my life, and that academia has been wonderful, but that my family has always come first. And when I've been at the University of Pennsylvania, as Greg said, you really get bored every 5 years or so. I think you need to do something different. And so I've really been changing who I am about every 5 years. So first I founded and directed a Center for Bioinformatics. This is before it was popular. It was way in the early 90s that I was doing that. Then I had the great opportunity to work as the deputy dean of the School of Engineering and worked with the dean, who was a fabulous dean. I then got really interested in advancing and promoting women in engineering, probably because as deputy dean, I felt like I had a responsibility that I had never felt before. Before I was surviving, right? Survival mode. Now I was I had to do stuff to help others. Then I was department chair, and now I'm the chair of the board of the Computing Research Association. So that is all by way of background so that you can put whatever I say in context and understand that I can't speak to industry from my own direct experience. What I will say is that throughout this, you always talk about research, teaching, and service as the 3 legs of an academic career. But if you think of a stool, those legs had better be the same height, right? Or else that stool is going to wobble and fall over. That's not the case at all. In fact, the 3 legs are growing at different rates throughout your career. So when you're a grad student, of course, it's all about research, although I think now we're increasingly looking to see if there's some teaching experience that our students have coming in. So a little bit of the teaching and service may be important, but really not. As an assistant professor, your focus really is on research and teaching. As Greg said, how many of you have been overwhelmed by teaching and what you've been doing so far? Yeah. I'm still overwhelmed, and I've been doing it for a long time. So teaching, oh dear, what happened there? Xfinity wants me to do something. I don't know why, but that's the way it goes. So as an assistant professor, it's really the research and teaching. I don't know, as a woman, I was always asked to do more service, and so I got very good at saying no nicely very early on in my career. So to the service, I really tried to tone that down because having 2 young children and a father who was dying was rather difficult at the time. As an associate professor, this is really where you're trying to get your visibility and stature going in terms of leadership, and so grants become important as an associate professor. As an assistant professor, you really should get that NSF Career Award, start getting into some grants, but really in the evaluation process, you're expected as an associate professor to rise into leadership and show that type of thing. Teaching and services is also very important. And I think it's very important that as you go along, you want to document what you've done. If you're anything like what I am, you will forget a week after you've done something that you've done it. And so I keep a brag sheet for the year, and every time I do something, like I serve on a panel, I serve on a panel for NSF, or I'm invited to give a talk somewhere, or I write a paper. I sort of write it down because I know I'm going to forget. So if you just document as you go along, it's really very helpful at the end of the year. Then you can put them in the right place in your CV and update everything. Innovation in teaching. If you've done innovations in teaching, keep a record of what that innovation is. And if there's some impact, like, I don't know, presenting a paper at the ACM 60, thank you, ACM 60, you should put that in. You should keep track of the collaborations, because your memory is not your friend, or at least mine has never been my friend, so I have to keep these things written down. I'd like to, since Greg went into so much detail on the research, teaching, and service, I think I'm going to skip over that, and Dan can touch on it more. We are happy to answer questions, but I want to tell you the untold story, which is something that took me my entire career, I think. I'm only still learning it now. Relationships really matter, okay? Anybody in business knows this, but we're in academia, and we think it's all about how brilliant we are. You know, as Greg said, he's lucky. I'm lucky. Many of us are lucky. It's also about the relationships that you cultivate. So it's really important to treat other people, faculty, staff, students, deans, department chairs. Deans and department chairs are people too. I mean, I think that came across beautifully in Greg's talk. He was approachable. He was talking about emotions. He was a very person. But very often, especially when you're coming up for promotion and you see this layer above you and you have no influence, you feel, over the decisions that are being made. You feel like you are not as powerful as you would like. You tend to create villains out of those people, and they're people, and keep that in mind. When I had the opportunity to work as a deputy dean, he always used to say that you can tell the quality of a person by how they treat the staff. Okay? It is really important not to get your frustrations out on the staff. And when we hire people, we actually do talk to the staff, especially those who are organizing the visit, about how they were treated or what their perceptions of the candidate were. Because these are precursors to how those people are going to treat their colleagues later on. So it's good that you must have treated the staff well at your interviews, but it's something to keep in mind that you aren't above other people. Other people, whether they're teaching you how to teach, whether they're organizing your schedule, they're really highly competent people, and you should treat them well. Students, we also interview students about how, we talk to students about how the interviews have gone. So I think that as academics, sometimes we forget, yes, we know that we have to get the letters, so we know we have to be nice to certain people who are above us, who are going to be writing those letters, but it's the people at your level and the people below who are also very important. Sort of a subsequent thing to this, again, this is something that anybody in industry really knows. How do you build relationships? Well, it's the informal encounters as much as anything else, and I apologize again. Sorry, I have to change my screen. Really, it's that you should never eat alone is a dictum. I am violating that every day now because I teach at noon, and so it's very hard for me to go out for lunch with people. But if you have, not schedule, but if you have those informal encounters with people, it's easier to develop those wonderful relationships that Greg sort of talked about that became keystones in his success. The other thing is you either have to be part of the solution or you're going to be part of the problem. There are lots of things that don't work well in academia and probably in industry too. You may teach in a room where the AV doesn't work so well. You may, I don't know, you may not get the office you like. It may have a leak in the corridor. It may be too hot sometimes. You may You can go on and on about all of the things that you don't particularly like. And this then ends up as a complaint in your department chair, and sometimes it escalates to the dean. This is not the way to win friends and influence people. It's like most people understand that this is an issue, so it's much more productive if rather than complaining, you try to figure out here's a problem and here's a solution. Maybe if we did this, it would make the department work better. Or, none of our students seem to know about how to go out and get jobs. Well, maybe we could have a series of informal discussions with the students about how to do that. So the research, the teaching, the service, those legs are all terribly important. They grow at different rates. But I think my message is that it's also the relationships that you build, because those are going to impact how well you're doing in the research and the teaching and the service. So that's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
That's great. That's great. The problem of following Greg and Sue is that they've already covered all the great points. I wish I'd had advice like this when I was a young faculty member just starting off. You've heard a lot of great advice. Hopefully it rings true with you. You probably heard some things that were really counterintuitive, and you're thinking, nah, that can't be true. And I think Sue and I would both say, yeah, that actually is true, even though it's counterintuitive. So please, continue to pay close attention. Sue and I are like members of the New Jersey, Pennsylvania Mafia. So I grew up in New Jersey, and I went to undergrad at Dartmouth, and I came back to do my PhD at Princeton. We both did our PhDs at Princeton. At slightly different times. And then I went to Brown. I was on the faculty at Brown. And then I came back to Princeton and helped start a research lab that was funded by a big Japanese company, but it was in Princeton. And then I went to Bell Labs just for about 6 months of sort of the high end of the arc of Lucent Bell Labs. And then, that didn't work out so well towards the end. And then I went to Lehigh, and I've been at Lehigh for 15 years. I also want to say that in about 5 minutes, you got this note probably. In about 5 minutes, evidently a fire alarm was going to go off. And I knew it was going to be right in the middle of when I was talking about stuff. So we'll try not to panic and jump when that happens. But so having impact, research, teaching, and service. Sue did a wonderful job. Certainly some advice that is, again, rings very true in my life as well. Impact. So what does impact mean, right? And in your institution, it could be different than someone else's institution. So does it mean publications in important venues? That certainly is, I guess, of fundamental importance, but more or less importance depending on what institution you're at. Grant funding, right? You might be at a place where it's been made very clear to you the level of funding you need to obtain to be able to get tenure and get promoted. Or you may be at a place where that isn't so important. It's scholarly impact, and however you achieve that scholarly impact, is loosely coupled to grant funding. Curricular innovations. Some of you might be at schools where teaching is the number one thing, and that's great. And the question is, what can you do with respect to curricular innovations? And what would be impact in terms of curricular innovations? Service, right? How do you make an impact in service? So that's maybe a little bit of a vaguer concept for many of you since you're just starting off your careers. The great thing about being at this symposium is you're seeing people like Greg and Sue who have done tremendous service to the community. You're being able to interact with some of the true leaders, national leaders, and that's the things that they've done are indications of having impact with service. That takes time. That's not all stuff you're going to do as a junior researcher in the field, but it is something that you can aspire to for sure. And the great thing about the leaders is they're incredibly giving in their opinions and their advice. Visibility in the community, national community, local community, national community, international community, right? How do you obtain that visibility? Do you want to be known as a leader and an innovator, or as a great collaborator, right? Or both, hopefully both, right? Great collaborator who's also a leader and an innovator. So one question you need to ask yourself and find the answer to, and you probably are already getting the answers to this already, is how does your particular institution judge impact? How does it measure it? How does it represent it? How does it communicate that? So you should find this out, and the goal would be to channel your work in the directions that are going to be recognized by the institution, but make sure that it makes sense to you. You don't want to do something that's uncomfortable, that doesn't make sense, just because you think it's going to get you in a news story on the homepage of your university. So this means not just, there are a couple different ways of doing this, certainly. One is to observe, ask more senior people at your institution, what's important here? If I did this, would it be a valuable thing for me to do? If I contributed this, or I devoted my energy this way? As Sue said, you should certainly seek out advice. You should be part of the social community of your department, your unit, and freely ask of advice. And you'll find that your colleagues are very, very willing to grant that. Experiment a little bit and see what works, right? Not everything you're going to do is going to be successful. You've all got research in your background. You know that not all of our experiments, not all of our research pans out. It wouldn't be research if it did. So apply that same criteria to all the things you do. Be experimental in your teaching, be experimental in your service, be experimental in your research as well, and adapt, right? Try some experiments and adapt. This is one of the most important things you can do. Find a mentor. So hopefully everyone here has at least one person that he or she considers to be a mentor. If you don't, you may wonder about how you could find a mentor, but we know that this is one of the most important criteria for success, is to have someone that you've connected with, someone who you consider to be a mentor, who you can go to with a wide range of questions. It could be someone at your own institution, it could be someone in your own department. There are good reasons why it might be better to have someone who's maybe at a different department at your institution, or someone who is in the field but not at your institution, or even someone who is in the field but not directly in your subfield, but someone you can bang ideas off of and who can provide you guidance, someone who's a bit more senior than you who can help you. But that's very, very important, is to have a mentor. And there are a lot of different opportunities for finding mentors and connecting with mentors. The other thing I think that Sue mentioned is this idea of being part of the community and making yourself visible. This is about having impact, and we're very reluctant as scientists, as researchers, as academics, to blow our own horn, right? So if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there, does it make any noise? You do something really, really great and no one in your department, no one at your university hears about it, it's almost like you didn't do it, right? And it frustrates me no end to have, I've got faculty in my department, they'll get an NSF grant and they won't tell me. It's like, I mean, how am I, right? What can I do? I can help you publicize it. I can help make it visible at the college level, at the university level. But I need to know about it. Get a best paper award. I need to know about it, right? Make sure you communicate. Blow your own horn, right? You got to be able to do this. Being shy is not going to buy you anything. That's really, really important too. All right, you've had success in research already. I mean, you wouldn't be here if you didn't have success in research. Build on that. Be open to new collaborations. That's very important. So I think Greg made it very clear that there's a lot of amazing, cool things in computing now. I mean, we're fortunate to be basically everywhere. And, who knows, someone might walk in your office, a student, a colleague, a collaborator, a visitor from another university with a great idea, and give weight to all of those things. One thing that you might tend to find is, as computer scientists, we're now everyone's friend. All other fields want to work with us, take advantage of our expertise, right? Because they've heard about deep learning or machine learning or whatever. But you want to be careful about being in the back seat of the car too often, right? So do collaborative work for sure, do interdisciplinary work for sure, but make sure that you're driving the car sometimes and that also you are driving computer science research, computing the field forward, right? That you're not just providing like the technical expertise for some other field. It's okay to do a little bit of that. But I find that comes up quite a bit. There's a lack of awareness of what fundamental computing research is in other fields. They're interested in chemistry or biology or history or whatever, right? Media, but they're not interested in what we care about. So make sure that you're driving the car sometimes. And be careful about that. That's just what I said, okay? Teaching, the great thing about being a computer scientist now is just as much innovation is happening in the field technically as every year there are like 3 or 4 brand new courses you could teach, right? Because there's stuff that like blockchain and stuff that just has come up, deep learning, right? This stuff didn't exist a few years ago, right? Now all these great new curricular innovations you can do, in addition to things like active learning and online learning and things like that. So there's tremendous potential to do innovation here. But on the other hand, probably a lot of you are at universities that have very high enrollments right now, and you're struggling with that too. Classes that frankly are far too big. So that makes some challenges. So yeah, there's tremendous potential here to have impact in teaching, but at the same time we are struggling. And that's up to your chairs and your deans to understand the nature of the battles you're fighting because of the high enrollments you're having to deal with. The other thing we're finding in computer science, and you need to be very respectful of this, is there are a lot of old-fashioned computer scientists out there. There are a lot of students who are studying computer science now in high school, which is great. They actually understand what it is. They're not going to all be the same. They're all coming from the same mold. They're approaching it from different directions. So there are a lot of people coming at CS from a lot more directions than was the case, 20 or 30 years ago. That's great. That's wonderful. But it makes some additional challenges for teaching, right? So the most important thing is to recognize this. Not everyone's like you, and run with it, right? Really take advantage of that, and you can be tremendously impactful. You want to be careful about this. You want to be careful if you're going to try something new. Greg mentioned that the first time you teach a course is exhausting. It's interesting. It's almost like being an athlete to be a faculty member. I'm sure you've given a lecture, maybe a couple lectures a day, and at the end of the day, you just want to go to bed because you're so tired, right? We're all like that. So it is a very physical discipline. There's a lot of energy that's involved here. So just be careful about the new commitments you take, but be willing to take those new commitments and make sure you've got support from your institution to do those things. The other thing is it's a team sport, right? So it's not like you're teaching your own little course in isolation. The students coming into your course are being taught by your colleagues, right? And they need to be prepared properly. And going out of your course, your colleagues are making assumptions about what you've taught them. So, when you go out and do your innovation and have impact in teaching, it's got to be in collaboration with your colleagues. It can't just be sort of off on your own some. Service. All right, so one of the things you probably have been told by your chair, I'm very willing to bet, is we're going to make sure you don't get caught up with too much service, right? We're going to protect you from doing too much service. That's often the strategy that happens with junior faculty because your teaching and your research are of primary importance, especially when it comes to getting tenure. You might have received a negative impression about service. It's like, don't ever do committee service, always say no. I mean, that happens, right? And I tend to be a little bit more, modest. You have to be able to say no. Greg said, learn how to say no. Sue said, learn how to say no. But you do want to say yes sometimes. And you're looking for the things where you're going to have impact to say yes to, right? So it might be hard for you to judge if someone asks you to serve on a committee, like, can you serve on the blah, blah, blah committee? Don't say yes right away. What you want to do is say, tell me about the blah, blah, blah committee. And then you want to say, well, give me a little while to think about it. And then you go talk to your chair, your senior colleagues, and say, I was just asked to serve on the blah, blah, blah committee. What do you think? And they'll give you an honest opinion. Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Or find a way to say no. That's really, really important. Don't always say no, and don't say yes right away, but consider the possibility. As you get more and more senior in your positions, your institution will expect you to do more service. It's really, really important. It's incredibly important, and it's something that you need to do more and more of as you become more and more senior in the field. Don't always think you should be running away about it. And that could be local service. As Greg mentioned, there's service to your department, your college, your university. So service to your local community, for example. There's a lot of potential for that. Or broader service to the profession, the national profession, like we're doing right now, or the international profession. And CCC and CRA are excellent examples of this. So one thing you really ought to do by the end of these 2 days is deeply understand what CCC does and what CRA does. They're incredibly important, and you can benefit from them about 5 different ways, right? So examples are visioning workshops. I think you'll hear more about these kinds of things. White papers. We actually interact with the leaders here in DC often in a variety of perspectives, the funding agency leaders, but also congressional leaders as well. I mean, CCC members involved briefing. Congressional staffers actually sometimes testify before Congress on important topics. So yeah, we're right in there making things happen. And then, the basic idea for service is to engage in activities that promote the health and well-being in the field. So my very last slide is on diversity and inclusion. This one is we didn't include that in the subtitle for the session, but it's such an important topic, it should be everywhere, and it deserves its own category. Sue's been heavily involved in this as well. She mentioned that, but this is something you all need to know about. You pick up a newspaper every day and you hear some horrid story about something bad that's happened, whether it's in CS, often it is in CS or in high tech, but sometimes it's in other areas as well. It's a major problem in academia and industry. The good news is I think the tide is starting to turn now. I would say the past few years we've started to make some serious progress, but still these horrible stories keep popping up. As computer scientists now, we're everywhere. We touch every aspect of society. So 30 years ago, we might have been able to get away with some bad behavior, which is a small group of geeks, and it didn't really matter. Now it matters tremendously. It's really, really important. We will screw up so many things if we don't get this right, and the ball's in our court. So we've got this responsibility because of the importance of computer science now, and we need to be engaged, all of us engaged in these issues of diversity and inclusion. And you might think, well, what could I do? I mean, I'm just teaching my course and doing my research. There you go. Good. Sounds like it worked. Or was that it? Oh, it's about to go off. Oh, now we have to wait in anticipation, and Helen is sitting right by it. Or maybe it won't. So, are we going to bet on whether it goes off or not? All right, I'll just keep going. Yeah. All right, so the fact is, just about everything you do in your interactions with colleagues, with students, it's got some aspect of this to it. The way you teach, the way you talk in class can have a very big impact. The way you engage professionally can have a big impact. What you see, happening could have a big impact as well. So and I'll say as a member of a majority group, a white male, I'm not always aware of this, but I've become more and more aware of this over the past few years. So it is something significant we all need to contribute to. I'll call that an all hands on deck moment. Okay. So and you can have an impact. You must have an impact. So that's it. I think we're ready for the panel.
So the way we wanted to structure this was to allow lots of time for questions. So please ask away.
Yeah.
My name is Tim Winiger from Notre Dame. What do you think has had the most impact individually from each of your careers? Has it been research, teaching, your being chair? What have you done that you think has had the most impact?
Oh, had impact.
That's a great question. And I think that the most impactful thing that I did was creating the Center for Bioinformatics back in the early 90s. Sorry. And the reason why it was impactful was, it's very funny. It came out of my teaching, actually. I was teaching a database class, and there were two guys in the class who were developmental biologists doing a postdoc at Wistar at the time, an institute. And they were trying to learn computer science because they were tired of sort of what they saw as cookie cutter science that was going on in biology, and they realized that data and analyzing data was going to be terribly important. This was before people were talking about it. So these two guys had a real vision. I didn't, but I did like these guys. And so after they graduated and they became the directors of they headed up the informatics component for human chromosome 22 that was being sequenced in Philly, they would come to me and start talking to me about their data management problems. And this was where a great research project emerged. We got funding from all over the place, from Department of Energy, from NIH, NSF, a bunch of foundations. Eventually it grew into a Center for Bioinformatics. So it was this sort of lucky encounter with these guys that had a vision, and I had to learn all these words that I'd never really learned before. I had to go take a course in biology, which to me was mind-boggling. So it was a bizarre confluence of research, because it grew out of research. It grew into teaching because we started one of the first graduate programs in genomics and computational biology. It grew into a center because the deans of 3 schools actually wanted to do something in this space, and we had no idea what we were doing, but it was fun, and we got going on it. So sometimes you have to take a risk, and I can't really say which was the most impactful. It grew out of the research, but it had teaching and it had a lot of service in there too.
Yeah, I think like in the case of Sue, it's hard to compartmentalize it in one of those categories, but it tends to spill over, right? So, but it always sort of ends up in some service. Something I would classify as service.
Yeah.
So I became involved in electronic voting when I was approached by, someone at the university communications office that said, "Can you believe what's going on?" This is after this is about 15 years ago, after the first, Gore v. Bush, discussion, and then the Hava replacement of voting machines with electronic machines. And I actually wasn't aware of it. I said, well, that's interesting. And I started looking at the research questions there and also the social questions as well. And I became vocal because we need to stand, there are times when computer scientists need to stand up and be counted, right, as experts. So, and as a result, became involved in a number of activities there. And there's some other stuff that's going on now. Again, it sort of spills out of a awareness of a social issue that then translates into research, could translate into teaching. I actually did some courses on electronic voting as well. And then always sort of spins out with that social component to it as well. So those are the things that I tend to think have, for me, have had tremendous impact. It's not been just compartmentalized and just been in the teaching area, just been the research. It's always sort of rolled and snowballed, actually often covering all three of those things.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting.
So I do like, if I can point out, I do like that none of you pointed to a single, like a paper.
mm-hmm. Right.
Right. So it's not like, oh, there's a PAMI paper that I really liked, and that's the most impactful thing. Right. So that's nice for me. I like that.
So the papers are important, of course, because
There it is.
10 years in promotion know how to count those things.
Yeah.
But I think that the university also values innovation that's going to set them apart. So this electronic voting, or these are significant things for the university.
I can see. So my question is around interdisciplinary work. So the NSF on paper talks a lot about how interdisciplinary work is useful, it's valuable, we should do it. But when you start to write the proposal or talk to your program officer, they kind of want you to be focused. And then you also talked about how don't take the back seat, you be a leader in computer science. But yet, when you share about the things that make the most impact, it's your interdisciplinary work, really, and the social benefits of that. So how do we, at this stage, kind of balance or tailor our research, from the fundamental computer science with interdisciplinary work? How do you know which interdisciplinary work is, really going to make a change? So that kind of thing. It's kind of trying to have that vision. Yeah.
So I think, first of all, as an assistant professor, the interdisciplinary work is challenging because you do need to become known as an expert in computer science, and those are where your letters are going to come from. So you do have to be careful that you are doing work that somebody in your field is going to be able to write about, because that's where your letters are going to come from. Having said that, it's also not everybody you collaborate with is the same. So it's not just interdisciplinary work, it's a relationship with a person. And some people in other fields understand what computer science is, and other people think it's just a tool. And I've worked with a lot of biologists, and some are not a lot of fun to work with because they are not willing to look beyond their 1-year needs to the 5-year possibilities.
That's a very good point. So one thing you should be aware of is, actually I got my.
I think you're okay.
Yeah. One of the great things that CRA does that you may not be aware of, but you should be, is issues best practices memos. So there's one very, very famous one that some of you might have benefited from already, which explains to tenure and promotion committees the importance of conference publications in the field of computer science, right? So, I mean, it used to be, hopefully it's no longer the case, that some universities would say, oh, only journals count. We don't care about
It's still a
conferences.
battle.
It's still a battle. Okay, it's still a battle at some places. So every single promotion and tenure memo that I write makes reference to the CRA best practices memo. It says, as is well understood in the field of computer science, top conference publications are on par with journals, right? That's really, really important, and you should know, and CRA's got your back, right? There's another memo that CRA's issued, I don't know if so knows the details, I don't know all the details, about evaluating interdisciplinary work in computer science, right? Because there is this danger, and actually biology, computational biology, bioinformatics is one of those fields where it definitely is a very serious issue. You've got a young, bioinformatician in your CS department, and sometimes there might be a knock or a rubber against that individual because where he or she publishes looks different. And in fact, it turns out that journal publications in bioinformatics are actually usually often more common than the conferences, which is a little bit counterintuitive in the field of CS, right? So you might end up with more journal publications than conference publications. So there are nuances, as Sue suggested, there are nuances and subtleties here with interdisciplinary collaborations. You have to, it's one additional complexity you need to worry about as a young faculty member. But you need to be aware about this CRA memo, because you'll want to be citing it. You'll want to make sure your chair understands what it says, and you'll want to use that as part of your, because that'll help, again, have your back when you do this. But as we mentioned, it's pretty common to encounter someone from another field who's really excited about working with you, but really, they should be working with an undergrad that you help supervise jointly, not you personally, because it's not going to lead to research that you can make use of. So I'm actually honest. I say, okay, for this project, it's not going to be me. It's going to be an undergrad. We'll hire an undergrad, and he or she will work with us together. You might not, and you want to be careful about doing too much of that, because of course you might not get a publication out of it. But at least you're sort of starting to build a bridge that might lead to something.
Yeah, but the other funny thing is that sometimes there's this low-hanging fruit that an undergrad can go in and do, but you sort of supervising it, you'll see something fundamentally important that is a really interesting problem, and that can lead to a great research topic downstream. So sometimes you have to kind of play it carefully and look for the opportunities and then take advantage of them.
Yep.
Thanks. I enjoyed your talk. I'm Tawana Dillon-Hunt at the University of Michigan, and for context, I'm in my, I just finished my 4th year, so going to my 5th. I also want to go back to this question of impact, and you both had similar responses. Again, going back to the interdisciplinariness of it was collaborative, and I wanted to clarify: was this as, I guess, would you say that this impact was something that you had in that 6th or 7th year as you were going up for tenure, or later in? Okay, so I was thinking maybe later in the career. So, and I don't know if is that true for you, Susan, as well? Like the example that you gave.
Yeah, certainly the Center for Bioinformatics was in my sort of associate professor phase. I think meeting that person and becoming involved in the research that led to the center. That was as an assistant professor. It was interdisciplinary, but it was still core computer science because the person I was collaborating with deeply understood the field. So I was, again, lucky because that was very high profile. Nobody else was really doing it at the time.
Okay, so I guess as an assistant professor going up, going into associate, how would you define your most significant impact, or what was it that you think pulled you over? And then secondly, reflecting on now what your greatest impact was, how would you foster that, I guess, as an assistant professor?
Well, all right, so as an assistant professor, I was incredibly shy. I worried, imposter syndrome, right? So I worried about what happens if I never have another good idea. I mean, I was seriously worried about that probably 80% of the time. It's like, I had one pretty good idea. What happens if I never have another one? And that actually concerned me for quite a long time. And right? So I would say the most important thing is to have faith. Some of the stuff you can't make happen, right? So so I wondered, like, how am I ever going to get on a program committee for a conference? Like, how am I going to do that? How am I going to become the chair of a conference? Like, I was wondering, like, how's this going to happen? It takes time, actually. So just do your best, do what you can, and some things you can't rush, unfortunately. Those things sort of happen with time, and they start to snowball with time. So some of this, at the point you're at, there's no magic recipe for starting a center, right? It's a lot of serendipity and a lot of luck, but a lot of it's having faith, trying to overcome imposter syndrome, and then, like I said, at any stage you are, it's really important that you toot your own horn. If you're shy and too introverted, no one's going to know the successes you're having. You want to make sure people are aware of that. And get a mentor, that's the other thing, or have a mentor.
Yeah, so I was going to pick up on that. I think that for me, I had a very good mentor when I was an assistant professor who really helped me a lot in ways that I can only now recognize, because I was so overwhelmed with having 2 babies and a father who was dying. I was extraordinarily stressed as an assistant professor. I never want to go back to that point in my life. But, you know, it was the happenstance of meeting this guy who I taught in my class and starting to collaborate and getting fundamentally interested in the research problem, which was data integration, which was not a new problem at the time, and it's not even solved now. But we had a story that we could tell. It was a very cute story, and that was the recognition that got me tenure, was really that. But I think the mentor, to me, was very helpful for helping with this imposter syndrome. And, you know, it was also a time when academia had no maternity policy. So I was going up against the guys. It was just tough. So mentors are important, and being really into your research is great.
So there's one advice I give to my students. I want to get some feedback on whether I'm doing the right thing. So computer science is very unique in terms of impact because we can open source our source code, and hundreds of people can download it and use it. Our work can lead to patent, that could lead to startup. If you have a project that has a visibility component, you can create a video, put it on YouTube, and millions of people can watch it. That's also an impact. Now, is that valued as equal as 100 citations on the paper, or writing good paper? And how do you know, is it something we should pursue as assistant professor, or something when you do as an associate professor?
I mean, that's tricky, right? Those are all really useful things. You're making a significant contribution. What you'll have to explain that at the various levels in the as you get higher in the evaluation, promotion, tenure process. Unfortunately, there is a tendency to look for certain obvious things, right? So you got to make sure you have enough of those obvious check boxes, I would say, for sure. If all of your contributions are open source contributions and you don't ever publish about it, that's going to be a very serious issue, I think, at some point in the process. I mean, your colleagues at the lowest level might understand it and appreciate it, but you'll have trouble going up a little bit further. You want to translate that into the kinds of things that your chair and dean and the tenure and promotion committee will understand as being impactful. I think it's really good to sprinkle some of those things throughout, but you still want the core, the publications, the teaching, and the service to be really strong as well.
No, I agree. I think that Greg touched on this when he said, especially with teaching, there's so many innovations in teaching that we can use nowadays, and it's the older ones of us who have more trouble with that, and you guys are probably going to be much better at using those innovations. The people who are looking at your tenure and promotion cases are us. And there's some things we understand well, and some things we don't understand so well. So I think that you will have impact through those YouTubes and open source, and that's wonderful, and you should do that. And that will be a younger generation who will recognize that impact. But if you're being evaluated by an older generation, you have to make sure that they understand how to evaluate that as well. And you're going to run into the same issues as we ran into as a field in computer science with these conference publications, when everybody else was used to evaluating based on journal publications that we mainly think are irrelevant. Some of us think are irrelevant.
So the one place where there might be a really big difference in different schools is the awareness and value placed on starting a company or working with a company. Some places might really love that. Some places it might be completely irrelevant to promotion and tenure. So it's really important for you to understand your institution and the way they view that. I've had faculty who go on leave for various purposes, and it's always a point to think about how's that contributing to the research mission of the university, right? In some cases, it might be regarded as a distraction that we're willing to let you have that distraction, but guess what? It doesn't really count for anything when we do promotion and tenure. And other places might be more modern thinking about that.
I'd actually love to hear from the rest of you about what you think about the impact of things like YouTube's and open source. Is that something that should become more part of something that we should evaluate? Yeah.
So I've noticed that the way students view impact is different from the way, thanks.
I guess this is just a hypothesis, but my hypothesis would be that students, their perception of impact and the kinds of impact that they are thinking about making might be different from what a tenure committee is thinking about when they think about impact. So, and I think one of the jobs as an assistant professor is trying to sort of negotiate those two worlds. And so I would argue for making those concrete measures or signals of impact at the tenure committee level.
What about the people in industry here?
There are a couple
Putting
of
you three on the spot. Okay.
Well, that's a good example in case patents in the case of industry
Yeah,
might be
exactly.
very, very significant,
Yeah.
and a university probably not.
Well,
So significant.
somewhat, but
Some-
not, you know,
something.
it's the, yeah. These are great points, yeah.
I'm in industry after being in academia, and I think the impacts there have to be more rapid. I've noticed the expectations of my employer now are completely different than academia, yet I'm still operating in that same mode. So I think we really have to focus on more of those tangible things that do come out of your work and how you're helping people with your outcomes. That's my experience in industry. Who else is in the room? All right.
Hi, Andrea Barton from IBM Watson Health. So this is something actually that I've been struggling with. I've started working there late August of last year, and so the push has always been, I'm actually with the design group, so not in IBM research, but the push has been certainly if we can get patents going, publications are nice, but the real issue is dollars, like what is your product out there? So as a design researcher, I have very little control over that though, so I'm sort of in this in-between state of trying to show how I'm doing is bringing value and how what is considered service, which is, I guess, speeding up, creating processes that everyone can feed into, and overall is making us do work faster, how that's of value. But it's when I tell people at first, if I can set this system up and everyone can feed into it, there's sort of this like, oh, well, you know, really you need to focus on revenue. And then after a while, then they see when things are getting better. So I've noticed that I have to do more than just say, this is the you know, X, Y, and Z will happen, but they have to see it happening over time. And that's a bit frustrating. But yeah, that's just how it is.
So my experience, having been both in industry and academia, and there are a lot of differences, and some of them are subtle, but one of the subtle differences is, I think in industry, it's much more important to be a team player, you know, part of a highly functioning team, and you're really making a contribution that's recognized. Greg mentioned this, but I describe academia when I talk to junior faculty, you're an entrepreneur. I mean, you're running your own business, right? It's your research enterprise, you know, it's sort of a different kind of thing.
I was in industry for 7 years, and I don't know if my answer is as a person who was in industry or just now. I mean, Dan, your last point was diversity and inclusion, which is a big deal. And I mean, I think we need to recognize that all researchers are different. So if you're a software, you know, if you're in software, you're developing software and you make it open source and you have, you know, 1 million hits, that's a big deal, right? I mean, that may not come from me, but it may come from my colleague.
Yeah.
You know, there may be another colleague who makes impact, you know, a different way. Those of us who study, you know, social computing, maybe you have, you know,
Right.
YouTube videos, I don't know. But I think, you know, it kind of goes back to your point of
Right.
diversity and inclusion, and you can't really evaluate every researcher in the same way.
Yeah.
Some of this is being pragmatic, so we should remember that we're all computer scientists, and I tend to think that we're one of the most open-minded group of academics, and massively broad, massively collaborative. I can't point to any other field that's, I mean, obviously math is fundamental and things like that are fundamental, but you got to remember at some point in the tenure promotion evaluation process, you're hitting not just computer scientists, there are decision makers who are going to be chemists or mechanical engineers or, you know, historians. And you got to think about the way they're looking at your case as well, right? They might say open source, what is that? Right, it's possible.
And I think that's where you need to sell.
Yeah.
You need to sell that perspective.
That was actually a
Yeah.
question that I had. So one thing that Greg said was that the letters are the most important thing in our tenure case. So I guess my question is how do we sell? Dan, you said this, we have to sell, but what is the best way, or what, I guess my question from a letter writer's perspective is, what is it that I can look at to make my job easier in writing that letter? Right?
Yeah, really good letter writers will understand this and will realize this. Someone who's written a number of these letters will understand what they need to explain under these circumstances, right? So for example, as a letter writer, I told you that I always include the CRA best practices conference paper memo when I'm a chair, but as a letter writer, I also reference that because I know my letter will be read by, you know, a committee at another university, and maybe the chair is, you know, because you won't see what the chair has written. Maybe the chair will mention it, maybe they won't. So as a letter writer, I also make sure that, you know, if I saw a tremendous open source contribution, I was writing a letter, I would make sure to highlight that out, because at the other university, again, the case may be read by, who knows what the provost is, the dean's background, the provost's background, you don't know.
Yeah. So you as an assistant professor may have input on who those letter writers could be. Some places don't want you to give that kind of input because, or they'll have you limited input, maybe 2 letter writers you can suggest. But there's always back channels to the people who are going to be suggesting those names, where you can go out for lunch with them and sort of mention names of people that you know who could be useful.
If you want to talk just 1 second about open source, this probably is deserving of its own discussion, how to refer to this. You guys mentioned downloads, and one thing we're pretty clear is a lot of people download stuff and don't use it, right? So you really want to translate the download measure into, and I'm sure even someone from history or political science would realize that. You want to translate that into impact, some kind of impact that can be measured. It won't be traditional citations maybe, but it'll be something else.
So actually, I'm working on currently a whole idea of data and program citations. It's a whole new field, and it's one of those, you know, stupid ideas. There's a lot of impact that could happen.
Just for timing, we'll probably have time for one more question.
Okay, there's a time.
Sure, I have kind of a related question. So for those of us whose specialty areas are sort of niche or they serve a small population, like for example, a lot of my work is in like creativity support tools for video game designers, for example. Sometimes I find it difficult to argue impact on these like second or third order effects. Like I make a tool that makes it easier for somebody else to do a thing that makes other people like have some kind of experience or something. Or like I try to make these things more available so you don't need to have specialist training to do like X, Y, or Z authoring processes. How can we change the way that we think about our own work if it's niche like that? Or how can we sort of sell these sort of second or third order effects when we're thinking about impact, like for ourselves and for writing grants or for tenure committees or for whatever other purpose?
Well, so I mean, you explained a bit about how you're trying to make this case. It's a second order or third order. Those things are, I think people will generally understand those kinds of things are important. I mean, you're not curing cancer, right? So you're saying I can't claim I'm helping to cure cancer, right? So yeah, I think probably a lot of us fall in that same category that we can't claim that we're helping to cure cancer, but you're still doing very credible, very important work, and you know you're a part of a community. We're all part of a sub-community, and your work is being recognized in that sub-community. So that goes a very long way. You don't have to be able to claim that you're curing cancer. I think that's setting us all up for failure, probably. Yeah. Well, she might be.
No, I can't.
So.
Thank you, everybody.